There's a particular kind of loneliness that has no name in ordinary conversation. It is not the loneliness of being alone. It is the loneliness of being beside someone, sleeping in the same bed, eating at the same table, moving through the same house, and being unseen, unreached, unchosen. You are there. He is there. But something between you has gone quiet in a way that is different from the quiet of two people who are simply tired or busy or in a temporary season of less. This is a different quiet. This is the quiet of a man who used to reach for you, who used to seek you out, who used to find you, and who has stopped. Not dramatically, not with an announcement. He simply stopped turning toward you, and you noticed. Of course you noticed. How could you not notice the absence of the thing that once said, without words, "You are wanted. You are chosen. You're the one I come to." That reaching, that seeking, is not a small thing in a marriage. Padre Pio understood this. He understood it not as a spiritual director who had been married, but as a confessor who had sat with thousands of married souls and had heard, from both husbands and wives, what the slow withdrawal of desire does to the interior life of a marriage. And he said something that almost no one says out loud in this conversation. He said the wife whose husband no longer seeks her is not suffering only an emotional wound. She's suffering a covenant wound, because seeking, the turning of the husband toward his wife, the choosing of her, the desire for her presence and her closeness, that seeking is not incidental to the marriage. It is part of what the covenant was designed to be. And when it stops, something in the covenant has been interrupted, not destroyed, interrupted. And Padre Pio said, there is a prayer for this interruption that most women never pray. Not because they do not want to, but because no one has ever shown it to them. Tonight, I am going to show you that prayer. But first, I need to show you something about this specific silence, this specific withdrawal that will change the way you understand what has happened and give you the exact spiritual orientation you need to pray about it with power. But before I go there, before I show you what Padre Pio saw underneath the withdrawal of a husband seeking, I want to ask you something. If you're watching this video tonight, you're not watching it by accident. Something brought you here. Maybe the title landed on something you have been living with for months and have not been able to name. Maybe you've been wondering if what you are experiencing is even something you are allowed to bring to prayer. Whether this is a spiritual matter or simply a personal one, a private grief too small or too complicated or too intimate to lay before God. And I want to tell you something clearly before we go any further. Padre Pio never once told a soul that their suffering was too small, too complicated, or too private for God. He told them the opposite. He told them that the suffering no one else sees is often the suffering God is most urgently reaching toward. So write in the comments right now, just these words, "Lord, let him seek me again." Write it as your prayer, your declaration, your willingness to bring this specific grief before God and before this community of women who are carrying similar things in similar silence. And if you know a woman who is living this, quietly, privately, wondering whether what she is feeling is even real, write her name in the comments. Write it so that we can stand in prayer with her. Because Padre Pio said that a prayer offered in community for a suffering soul reaches heaven with a particular force that solitary prayer alone cannot produce. Write her name, write your declaration, and stay with me, because what Padre Pio saw about this specific situation is something that I believe will bring you clarity where there has been only confusion. Let me begin with something Padre Pio observed across decades of sitting with married souls. Something he said with the calm certainty of a man who had seen the same pattern too many times to doubt it. He said, when a husband stops seeking his wife, He has almost always first stopped seeking God. Read that again. Not, the husband stopped loving his wife. Not, the husband found someone else. Not, the husband became selfish or cold or indifferent as a simple choice. He stopped seeking God first. And the withdrawal from the wife was the external expression of an interior withdrawal that began somewhere else, somewhere deeper, somewhere Padre Pio could see in the soul of the man that the wife could not see from the outside. Because this is what Padre Pio understood about the theology of marriage that most Catholics have never been taught. The husband's capacity to seek his wife, to desire her, to turn toward her, to choose her with the full presence of his attention and his love. That capacity is not generated by the marriage alone. It is generated by the man's interior life, by his relationship with God, by the state of his soul. A man who is alive in God, whose prayer life is real, whose conscience is active, whose interior life is in contact with the source of love. That man has a natural overflow of the capacity to love his wife. Because love in a human being does not generate itself from within. It is received from God and given outward. And a man who has cut himself off from the source, through sin, through spiritual laziness, through a gradual drift from prayer and the sacraments, is a man who has less to give. Not because he has chosen to give less to his wife specifically, but because the well has run dry. And you cannot draw from a dry well no matter how much you lower the bucket. This matters enormously for how you pray. Because if the withdrawal of your husband's seeking is rooted not in a decision about you, but in the state of his interior life before God, then the prayer that addresses it is not primarily a prayer about the marriage. It is primarily a prayer about the man's soul. And the wife who understands this is the wife who prays with precision, who aims at the root rather than the symptom, who asks God to restore what was lost at its source rather than asking God to fix the visible surface without touching what is underneath. But before the prayer, I need to show you the three things Padre Pio said are most commonly at the root of a husband's withdrawal of seeking. Because the prayer for each of these is slightly different. And knowing which root you're praying about gives your intercession a specificity that changes everything. And the first of these three roots is the one that will surprise you most. The first root of a husband's withdrawal of seeking, according to Padre Pio, is not what you expect. It is not another woman, though that could be a consequence of this root left untreated. It is not a loss of love, though that can follow if the root is not addressed. The first and most common root is this: the accumulation of unconfessed guilt. Padre Pio said something extraordinary to a husband who came to his confessional, a man whose wife had sent him, convinced that something was wrong in the marriage. The man sat before Padre Pio and said, "Father, I don't understand what has happened. I love my wife, but I cannot seem to reach for her anymore. I don't know why. Something is blocked." And Padre Pio did not ask him about his marriage. He asked him, "When did you last make a good confession?" The man was caught off guard. He said it had been months, maybe longer. And Padre Pio said, "Go to confession, make a complete confession, and then come back and tell me if the problem is still there." The man left, made a thorough confession, and came back 2 weeks later. He said, "Father, it is gone. Whatever was blocking me, it is gone." Padre Pio said, "It was never a problem with your marriage. It was the weight of what was unconfessed. Guilt that has not been brought to God presses down on a man's capacity for love. He cannot give freely what he is carrying too heavily to offer." Do you understand what this means? Unconfessed guilt, sin that has been lived with rather than brought to the sacrament. does not only wound the man's relationship with God, it wounds his capacity to be present in every relationship, including and especially his marriage. Because guilt creates a specific kind of interior posture, the posture of a man who knows he does not deserve what he is receiving, and a man who believes, somewhere beneath the surface of his daily life, that he does not deserve the love of his wife, that he has done things that would make her look at him differently if she knew. That man begins to withdraw, not deliberately, not as a plan, but as the instinctive movement of a guilty soul away from the light of a love it believes it has forfeited. He stops seeking because seeking requires opening, and a man carrying unconfessed guilt cannot open without exposure. And exposure is the thing he is most afraid of. So he closes, he withdraws, he stops reaching, and the wife, who cannot see what he is carrying, only sees the withdrawal and interprets it as evidence of something wrong with her, when the problem is something wrong in him that has nothing to do with her at all. And so the first prayer, the prayer for the husband whose withdrawal is rooted in accumulated guilt, is the prayer that asks God to bring him to confession. Not to confession as a formality, to a real, complete, interior reckoning with what he has been carrying. And you pray, Lord, I pray tonight for my husband's conscience. I pray that the weight of whatever he is carrying, the things unconfessed, the things pushed down, the things he has been living with rather than bringing to you, I pray that that weight would become too heavy to continue carrying. Not to crush him, Lord, but to motivate him. Let the weight do what weights are designed to do in the mercy of God. Bring the man to his knees before the sacrament that was given specifically for this moment. Move my husband toward the confessional, Lord. Move him toward the priest who can speak in your name the words that lift what no human effort can lift. Your sins are forgiven. Go in peace. And when those words are spoken over him, let what is blocked in him be unblocked. Let what is closed in him begin to open. Let the man who could not seek because he was carrying too much be freed to seek again. That is the first prayer, precise, targeted, rooted in the theology Padre Pio lived. And it is the prayer that opens the most common first door. The second root Padre Pio identified is harder to name, but equally common. And he identified it first, not in husbands, but in himself. In his own interior life, during seasons of spiritual aridity, those long periods of spiritual dryness that every serious soul of prayer passes through. He called it the silencing of the interior ear. Let me explain. Every human being has the capacity within their spiritual life to hear, to sense the promptings of grace, the movement of conscience, the quiet direction of the Holy Spirit. This capacity is not equally developed in everyone, but exists in everyone. And Padre Pio said that in a man who has allowed his prayer life to grow thin, who has stopped going to Mass with real presence, who has let the rosary fall away, who has allowed the noise of work and distraction and the world to fill every available space, in that man, the interior ear begins to go deaf. Not permanently, but functionally deaf to the things that matter most. And one of the things the interior ear is designed to hear, designed by God, built into the soul of a husband through the graces of his marriage sacrament, is the voice of his wife's need. The signal that says, she needs you. She is here. Turn toward her. That signal is a grace, and like all graces, it is received by an interior faculty. And when that faculty has been deafened by spiritual neglect, the signal exists, but the husband cannot hear it. He is not refusing to respond. He literally cannot receive what his silenced interior ear is no longer capable of picking up. Padre Pio told a woman this, a woman who had come to him bewildered by her husband's apparent unawareness of her loneliness. She said, "Father, it is as if he cannot see that I am suffering. He is not cruel. He is not angry. He just does not seem to notice that I need him." And Padre Pio said, "He cannot hear what he is no longer equipped to hear. His interior ear has been closed by neglect, by the noise of the world, by a spiritual life that has grown too thin to receive what God is trying to transmit. He is not indifferent to you. He is deaf to the signal. And the cure is not for you to speak louder. It is for him to get quiet enough for his interior ear to open again." And what opens the interior ear? Padre Pio's answer was immediate and unambiguous. Prayer. Real prayer. The kind of prayer that requires silence, that costs something, that is not hurried through on the way to something else. The rosary prayed with full attention. Mass attended with real presence. A moment of genuine silence before God, in which the man stops filling every space with noise and lets himself be heard by the one who speaks in a still small voice. And so the second prayer, the prayer for the husband whose withdrawal is rooted in the silencing of the interior ear, is the prayer that asks God to create in the man an encounter with silence. And you say, "Lord, I pray tonight that you would bring my husband into silence." Not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of encounter. The silence in which your voice can be heard. I pray that the noise he uses to avoid that silence would become less satisfying, less filling, less able to hold his attention. I pray that something in him would begin to hunger for quiet, for the specific quality of interior stillness that is the precondition for hearing you. And when the silence comes, when he is finally still enough to hear, let the first thing he hears be your voice saying what you have always been saying to him. "I am here. Your wife is here. Your marriage is here. Turn back. Come home to yourself. And in coming home to yourself, come home to her." That is the second prayer. It does not ask God to change the husband's feelings. It asks God to restore the interior capacity through which real feeling flows. And the third route, the most serious of the three, the one Padre Pio said was most dangerous because it was most invisible, is what he called the displacement of the heart. And I need to be precise about what I mean here, because this is not the same as another woman, though it can lead there if is not addressed. The displacement of the heart is the gradual relocation of a man's deepest desire away from the covenant relationship and towards something else, something that is not necessarily sinful in itself, but that has been allowed to take the place that only the marriage was designed to occupy. It could be work. It could be a friendship. It could be an ambition, a hobby, a screen, a fantasy, anything that has been allowed to grow large enough in the interior life that it begins to receive what was meant for the wife. Padre Pio said, "The heart of a man has a center, and God designed that center to be occupied in the human order by two things, by God himself and by the covenant spouse. When something else moves into that center, when anything else begins to receive the attention, the desire, the seeking that was meant for God and for the wife, the marriage begins to go cold. Not because the man chose coldness, but because he gave his warmth somewhere else. And warmth given the wrong direction leaves the right direction cold. Let me tell you about a woman who came to Padre Pio after 12 years of marriage. She said, "Father, my husband is not a bad man. He has not left. He has not been unfaithful, as far as I know. but he is completely absorbed in his work, in building his business, in achieving what he set out to achieve. And I feel as though I disappeared from his heart 7 years ago. Not dramatically, but gradually, as if I simply became part of the furniture of his life rather than its center. Padre Pio sat with this for a moment, and then he said, "Your husband's heart has been displaced. The work, which began as a good thing, a legitimate thing, a holy expression of his vocation as provider, has grown beyond its proper place and has entered a territory it was never meant to occupy. It now receives from your husband what only God and you were meant to receive. His first attention, his deepest desire, the energy of his soul. And you feel this not as anger, but as invisibility. Because invisibility is exactly what it is. You have become invisible to the displaced heart. Not because you have changed, but because his heart has moved." And then Padre Pio said something that the woman recorded and that her daughter later shared. Pray for the displacement to be recognized. Because a man whose heart has been displaced almost never knows it has happened. He experiences his absorption in the work as virtue, as responsibility, as dedication, as love expressed through provision. He does not see that what was meant to be a tool of love has become a competitor to love. Pray that God would show him. Pray that something in the work, some limitation, some failure, some moment of emptiness at the end of a successful day would open his eyes to what he has placed at the center and place of what should be there. Not to destroy the work, but to return it to its proper place, so that his heart, emptied of the displacement, would find what it was designed to seek. First God, then you. And here, if you have been watching this video, if something in these 3 roots has landed in a place that has been waiting for a name, I want to stop for a moment and ask you to stay with me. Because what I'm about to give you is the complete prayer for tonight. A prayer built on everything I have just shown you, shaped by Padre Pio's own spiritual direction, designed for the specific situation you are in. And I want to ask you to subscribe to this channel right now and hit the bell notification before we go further. Because this is one of many teachings Padre Pio left, specific, targeted, spiritually precise teachings for wives living through specific marital crises. And every time I publish a new video, the bell will bring it directly to you. You will not have to search for it when you're already carrying enough. Subscribe right now, hit the bell, and let me give you the prayer for tonight. Before I do, I want to pause on the most serious of the 3 roots, the displacement of the heart, because I have not yet told you the full consequence of leaving it unaddressed. And this is the moment in this video where I need you to pay very close attention, because what I am about to say is the thing that explains not only your husband's current withdrawal, but the specific spiritual danger it creates if the trajectory continues. Padre Pio said something sobering to a group of his spiritual children who had asked him about the state of Christian marriages in the modern age. He said, "The greatest danger to the married man is not the obvious temptation. It is the slow, invisible displacement of the heart that happens over years, that happens so gradually the man does not feel it moving, until one day he wakes up and finds that his heart is a stranger to his wife. That the intimacy that should have been deepening over decades has instead been replaced by a polite cohabitation. And then, when the heart has been empty in the marriage for long enough, then the obvious temptation arrives. And it finds a heart that is already empty, already displaced, already hungry for something it has not been receiving from the covenant. And the man who might have resisted easily 10 years earlier, when his heart was full of the marriage, falls. because he is empty. And emptiness makes a man vulnerable in ways that fullness never would. The displacement of the heart, if left unaddressed, creates the conditions for everything else. And the wife who prays for the displacement to be recognized before it becomes something worse is the wife who is fighting the battle at the right stage, early enough that the full consequence can still be avoided. This is not a small prayer. This is the prayer that protects the future of the marriage by addressing the present drift before it reaches the crisis point. And Padre Pio said that this specific prayer, the wife's intercession for the recentering of her husband's displaced heart, has a particular power to move in the situation because it is the covenant spouse praying for the covenant to be honored. And God, who sealed that covenant, takes that prayer seriously. And now, I need to ask you something urgent before we reach the prayer itself. You just heard the most serious thing in this video. The displacement of the heart, left unaddressed, creates the exact conditions for the crisis that follows. And I want to ask you, do you know a woman who has already passed this stage? A woman whose husband's withdrawal of seeking led, over time, to something worse, to another woman, to a departure, to a crisis that might have been prevented if she had known earlier what to pray. While everything you just heard is alive in you, take this video and send it to someone who needs it tonight. A woman who is in the early stages of this silence and does not yet know what it might become if the root is not addressed. A woman who needs to know that Padre Pio left a prayer for tonight, for this specific moment before the trajectory sets. Share this video right now, through WhatsApp, through a text, through whatever reaches her. You do not need to explain it. You can simply say, watch this tonight. One share, one woman who prays earlier. One marriage that is fought for at the root before the root becomes a crisis. Padre Pio would call that an act of spiritual charity. Do it now, and then stay with me, because the prayer itself is about to begin. Here is the prayer Padre Pio left for the wife whose husband no longer seeks her. And I want to begin by telling you what this prayer is not, because naming what it is not is as important as naming what it is. This prayer is not a prayer that asks God to manufacture desire in your husband. It is not a prayer that attempts to spiritually compel or manipulate the will of another person. Padre Pio was explicit that authentic love cannot be compelled, and that a prayer which seeks to override the will is not a Catholic prayer, but a distortion of it. This prayer is something entirely different. It is a prayer that asks God to remove what is blocking what is already there. Because Padre Pio believed, with complete conviction, grounded in the theology of the marriage sacrament, that the desire a husband has for his wife does not disappear. It is suppressed. It is covered. It is displaced. It is buried under guilt or deafened by spiritual neglect or relocated by displacement, but does not die. The grace of the sacrament ensures that the original desire, the desire that was present on the day of the marriage, that was sealed into the covenant by God Himself, is still there, waiting beneath whatever has covered it. And the prayer for tonight is the prayer that asks God to uncover it, to remove what is suppressing it, to open what is blocking it, to call it back to the surface from wherever it has gone. That is a completely different prayer from asking God to create something that is not there. And it is a prayer that Padre Pio said can be prayed with complete confidence, because you are not asking God to do something new. You're asking God to restore something He already built. The prayer for tonight has 5 movements, and I want to give them to you simply and clearly so that when you kneel tonight or stand or sit in whatever posture your body can manage in this moment of your life, you know exactly what you are doing and why. The first movement is the movement of presence. You come before God exactly as you are, not presenting a polished version of yourself, not tidying up the anger or the hurt or the longing before you approach Him. You come as you are and you say, Lord, I am here. With everything I'm feeling tonight, the loneliness, the longing, the specific grief of being beside a man who does not turn toward me. I do not pretend this does not hurt. It hurts deeply, and I bring the hurt before you not as a complaint, but as a prayer, because a hurt offered to God is not a wound anymore. It is an offering, so I offer it. Take this specific loneliness, Lord, the loneliness of the unchosen wife, the woman who is present and unseen, and let it be, in your hands, the beginning of something better than its absence. You enter the prayer as you are. No performance, no spiritual tithing, just you before God with the true weight of what you are carrying. The second movement is the prayer for his interior life. And this is the movement that addresses whatever root is most present in your husband's situation. If you recognize the first root, unconfessed guilt, you pray specifically for his conscience and for the grace of the confessional. If you recognized the second root, the silenced interior ear, you pray specifically for God to bring him into the silence that restores the capacity to hear. If you recognize the third root, the displacement of the heart, you pray specifically for God to show him clearly what has moved into the place that was meant for God and for you. You name the root, and you pray at the root, and you say something like, Lord, I pray tonight for my husband's interior life, not for his behavior, not yet, not directly, but for the soul underneath the behavior. I pray for whatever is covering what you placed in him on the day of our marriage, the grace that was sealed in him to desire me, to seek me, to turn toward me as the covenant spouse you gave him. Lord, that grace is still there. You put there. I ask you to uncover it. Remove whatever guilt is weighing it down. Restore whatever spiritual faculty has gone deaf to it. Recenter whatever heart has moved away from it, not by force, but by grace, by the irresistible, gentle, relentless grace that finds every opening and works through it until what was buried rises again to the surface. The third movement is the movement of the covenant declaration. You stand in the sacrament. You invoke it explicitly, and you say, Lord, I invoke tonight the grace of this marriage sacrament, the grace you sealed in us on the day of our wedding, the grace that was not contingent on how either of us felt 5 years in, or 10 years in, or in this season of silence. The grace that you sealed and that you hold in reserve for exactly this moment. The moment when the wife comes before you and says, I am still here. The covenant is still real, and I am calling upon its graces now. Lord, release those graces tonight over my husband. Let the sacramental grace of our marriage move in him. In the sleeping hours, in the waking hours, in the moments of stillness when everything he's been using to fill the space goes quiet and the truth of his life is visible to him. Let the grace of this covenant be louder than the displacement, louder than the guilt, louder than the deafness of spiritual neglect. Let call him home, to himself first, to you second, to me as the natural expression of both. The fourth movement is the movement of holy desire. And this is the movement that is most specific to this particular prayer, most rooted in the specific wound this video has been addressing. And it requires a kind of holy boldness that Padre Pio always encouraged in those who came to him. He said, do not be afraid to ask God for specific things. God is not offended by a specific prayer. He is honored by it, because a specific prayer is a prayer of faith, a prayer that believes God can do what it is asking for. So in the fourth movement, you ask specifically. You say, Lord, I pray tonight for the restoration of my husband's seeking, not as a demand, but as a specific, faithful request rooted in the covenant you established. I pray that the desire you built into this marriage, the desire that was present at its beginning, that is sealed into its sacramental grace, that has been covered rather than destroyed, I pray that you would uncover it, that my husband would begin again to seek me, to turn toward me, to choose me with the specific intentionality that covenant love requires. Not because I demand it, but because you designed the marriage to include it. Because a wife unsought in her own home is a covenant partially lived. And I believe you want this covenant fully lived, not for my comfort only, but for your glory, for the completion of what you ordained, for the good of both souls involved. So I ask specifically, Lord, restore his seeking. Let him seek me again. That is the fourth movement. Specific, faithful, rooted in the theology of what the marriage sacrament was designed to be. And the fifth movement, the final movement of the prayer for tonight, is the movement of surrender. Because every prayer that is genuinely offered to God must end in this movement. You surrender the outcome. You surrender the timeline. You release the prayer from the grip of your desperation, and you place it fully, finally, without taking it back, in the hands of the God who received it. And you say, Lord, I have prayed what I know how to pray. I have come before you with my specific need, my specific covenant, my specific husband, and the specific silence I am living in. And now I leave it here. I do not leave it because I have stopped caring. I care deeply. But I leave it because you are God and I am not. Because you love my husband more perfectly than I do. Because you see what is inside him in a way I cannot see. And because I choose, not as a feeling, but as an act of will, to trust you with this. The timing is yours. The how is yours. The specific path of restoration is yours. I will continue to pray. I will continue to be present in this marriage with everything I have. But the outcome I place in your hands. And I walk away from this prayer tonight, not with the certainty that tomorrow will look different, but with the certainty that you receive this prayer, that it is working in my husband's soul, and that the God who designed this covenant is not indifferent to its restoration. Amen. 5 movements: presence, intercession for the interior life, covenant declaration, the prayer of holy desire, surrender. That is the prayer for tonight. Now I want to give you something that Padre Pio always gave the souls who came to him with marital suffering. Something practical. Something you could do today in the natural world alongside the prayer you pray in the invisible world. Because Padre Pio never separated the spiritual from the practical. He believed they worked together, that the prayer created the spiritual condition, and the practical action gave that condition something to land in. And what he said to wives in this situation was this: become, in this season, the woman who is fully present to herself. Not to get his attention, though that may be an effect, but because a woman who is growing in prayer, in beauty of soul, in the specific radiance that comes from a woman who knows she is loved by God, even when she is not being sought by her husband. That woman creates a spiritual environment in the marriage that draws rather than demands. He was not saying, make yourself more attractive so your husband notices. He was saying something far deeper. He was saying that the wife who is truly alive in God, who is not shrunken by the neglect, not defined by the unchosen, not reduced by the silence. That wife carries something in her presence that the soul of her husband cannot entirely ignore. Not because she is performing, but because spiritual vitality in a person is visible in the invisible world. And a husband who has gone spiritually numb to his wife can be reached gradually, not by her pursuit of him, but by the quiet radiance of a woman who has gone deeper into God precisely because the human seeking stopped. Padre Pio said, "Let him see that you are more alive than his silence has made you." Not to shame him, but because a living thing close to a sleeping thing has a way of waking it. May Padre Pio, who understood the ache of the unsought soul, who spent 50 years receiving every kind of human longing in that confessional and meeting it with the specific mercy each soul needed, intercede for you tonight. May he bring before God this specific prayer from this specific wife for this specific man. May the graces of your marriage covenant, sealed by God on the day he witnessed your vows, held in his treasury for exactly this moment of their need, be released tonight over your husband's soul. May whatever is covering the desire be uncovered. May whatever is blocking the seeking be removed. May the man who was designed by God to turn toward you begin again, in this season, to find his way back to the turning. And may you, in the waiting, become the woman whose depth of soul, whose quiet radiance, whose rootedness in God makes his return not only possible, but irresistible. You are not invisible to God. You are not forgotten. And the prayer you pray tonight does not return empty. Amen. And before I close, one last thing. If this prayer speaks to where you are, if one of the 3 roots I named is the root you recognized, if the 5 movements give you something real to do tonight on your knees, write in the comments, I will pray for his seeking to return. Write it and tell me, if you are willing, which of the 3 roots felt most true for your situation. I read every comment, and your honesty shapes what I bring you next. If this video helped you, if it gave you clarity or a direction for your prayer, or simply the recognition that what you're feeling is real and has a name and has a prayer, please leave a like. That simple act places this video before the next woman who is typing her loneliness into a search bar tonight and who does not yet know that Padre Pio left something specific for her. And share it. Share it with her. She's out there. Now, in the next video, I am going to reveal something Padre Pio said about the husband who is still in the home, but who has emotionally checked out completely. The man who is physically present, but has built a wall so thick that no ordinary conversation can reach him. Padre Pio said that this specific wall has a specific origin, almost always the same origin, and that the wife who knows the origin can pray at exactly the right place to begin dismantling it. He also said there's something the wife can do in the natural world that almost always creates a crack in the wall. Not a conversation, not a confrontation, something quieter than that. Something that works in the invisible world before it works in the visible one. You will not want to miss this. Stay close. Keep the bell on. I will see you in the next video.